Hello and welcome to the Methodist Podcast, published on the 6th of August 2020. This week we talk to the Central Finance Board about a joint letter they've written along with the Methodist Church to their bank HSBC, challenging its position supporting the political situation in Hong Kong. We also consider the legacy of the atomic weapons that were detonated above Japan 75 years ago, and we hear how the Learning Network are engaging young people with issues of faith through online fitness videos. The Central Finance Board and the Methodist Church have written to their bank HSBC concerned at the organisation's continued support for the new security laws introduced by the Chinese government in Hong Kong. In the letter to the Chief Executive of HSBC, Noel Quinn, the Finance Board and the Church have urged the bank to reconsider its position. Joining me on the line is David Palmer, Chief Executive of the Methodist Central Finance Board, who along with Matt Tattersall, Director of Finance and Resources at the Methodist Church, have signed the letter. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Michael.
David, what's the background to this letter?
HSBC is more than our bank. HSBC is our partner in many, many things. Both ourselves and the church, as a large entity, have been involved with HSBC for decades. They're our banker. They hold our clients' assets for us. They check our regulatory performance, and we own shares in them. So they are someone we're very close to. Now, HSBC have been around for 155 years, and during all that time, they have been politically neutral. And for the first time, 2 months ago, they decided to come out in support of China's new security laws, and we felt it was time to speak up about that.
So what does the letter ask HSBC to do?
What it's really doing is saying to them, look, we're not happy with this change of stance you've taken. Please think about what you're doing. HSBC, as you probably know, is going through a massive restructuring. Regrettably, they've announced very recently 35,000 job cuts, a restructuring of the business. They are pivoting towards China. They announced that several years ago. And what we're seeing happening now is cuts in Europe, cuts in the US, restructuring towards China. Now, if that means the support of these horrible security laws in Hong Kong, we don't like that. But we need to start saying to them, please, you're going in the wrong direction. If you carry on this direction, we'll have to reconsider our position. This is really a first shot in that correspondence.
It's unlikely maybe that the letter's going to bring about change on its own. What's the response you're expecting from HSBC to this?
No, but there's been many investors in the UK who've written similar letters. Aviva very famously did so last month. If we can all start saying this, they are at a key point in their development. Are they going to refocus towards China? They moved to London in 1993 when they bought Midland Bank and put their headquarters here to get out of the Hong Kong and China. Are they going to reverse that? And it's time for all of us to stand up and say to them, think about what you're doing here.
Other faith organisations and maybe even organisations within the Methodist Church have accounts with HSBC. Would you encourage them to write as well?
Absolutely. And I did reach out to the connection to say, look, I'm writing to HSBC on behalf of the CFB. Do you wish to come alongside us? And they absolutely did. So it's a joint letter from ourselves and from Methodist Church. And as you say, HSBC have been our bankers in the church for decades. So I'd encourage others to write as well. We shouldn't just sit here and say they've done something wrong. We should tell them why we don't approve of what they're doing. It's a correspondence. I'm not saying we have a loud voice, but we have a voice. We have respect as the Methodist Church. Let's use it.
The Methodist Finance Board has a great reputation for holding those people it invests with to account. I'm wondering what particularly there was about HSBC that meant that you decided to take action over this issue.
We are great believers in engagement to bring about change. We're privileged to be shareholders on behalf of the church, on behalf of other charity clients in many companies. And where we can, we like to engage to try and encourage better behaviours. And we do that on a number of occasions. HSBC, as I said earlier, to us are very special. They're not just someone we have shares in. They're someone who have a partner of ours, who have worked with for decades. So we do feel close to them, and we do feel we have a right to say to them, you're going in the wrong direction here.
Given how closely I imagine the Central Finance Board and HSBC have to work, would you consider dropping the bank?
Never say never. We are very close to them. We are very embedded with them. Changing our relationship would take a lot of pain, a lot of cost, a lot of change. It's not something we would do lightly. I'd never like to rule it out. I suspect HSBC are going to go through further restructuring in the years ahead. They got to decide, is their core in China, is their core in the West, in the UK and Europe and the USA? If they go the one way, we'll probably need to think about a relationship with them.
75 years ago, on the 6th of August 1945, the United States detonated a nuclear weapon over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, followed on the 9th of August with a bomb dropped over Nagasaki. The two blasts killed over 300,000 people. Vice President Designate for the Methodist Conference, Barbara Easton, visited the Methodist University in Hiroshima as part of her role with the Methodist education team. I asked Barbara what she'd learned on her visit about the long-term impact of the bomb on the life of the city.
When you grow up, you learn the name Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and you only see the pictures of what happened in the war. The classic picture of Hiroshima is of the entire place laid to waste with nothing standing except the remnants of the one building in the middle, which I think was a government building. And it was built differently, which is why it still came to be standing. So because you really only learn of Hiroshima as a sort of type of devastation, it's surprising to go there and find that it is a thriving, bustling modern city, fabulous modern buildings. It's a really big city. And in many senses, you wouldn't know that anything had happened there, or that it bore any relation to that place that we learned about in the history books. But at the same time, it is deeply ingrained in the Japanese people, I think, but the people in Hiroshima certainly and particularly, this sense that this must never be allowed to happen again. And of course, the thing with the nuclear explosion is that it doesn't happen and then go away. The damage that it does to people and to the environment is very long-lived. So there was a very long-lived burden from the explosion to get over. And I think I was both struck by the long-livedness of it, and also that I think quite a Japanese sense of we pick ourselves up and we carry on and we make new. One of the most interesting people that I met in Japan is a woman whose first name is Kika, which is how I knew her. And she's obviously quite an elderly lady because she was a baby, just a toddler, I think, when the bomb came down. And she has given her life to talking about the bombing and about how it's affected her. And she was the daughter of the Methodist minister at the Methodist church in Hiroshima. And when the bomb dropped, she was at home with her mom. She was in her mom's arms, and her mom crawled out from the wreckage of the house with her in her arms. And one of the things that she will hold up and show you at this point is the tiny little pink dress that she was wearing, which she's kept from that day. And I mean, she's the most amazing woman. She is bright and lively and animated. She's a fantastic woman. But she is also extremely tiny, because one of the impacts of the explosion on her has been to very much restrict her growth. And it also has created issues of fertility and other ongoing health issues. But she tells the story of how after the bombing, as people began to reconstruct their lives, there was quite a number of children who had no family to be with, or whose burn injuries were so devastating that they were not really wanted anywhere else, and how they would congregate around the Methodist church and around her family. And she lived with the enduring impression of the damage to them, their hands fused together, the damage to their faces.
How does the city remember that tragic event?
There's a very beautiful memorial. It's one of these with a very long stretch of water and also a living flame. And while we were there, we laid a wreath. And there is quite a bit of wreath laying and things happen in one place by the flame. One of the symbols of the bombing and of the recovery from the bombing is the crane, and making origami cranes as a symbol of peace. So there's quite a lot of places where children are remembered and where children make or have made paper cranes that are strung together and then brought in great long strings. There is a need to take it seriously there and make sure that it is seriously remembered. One of the most moving statues there is one which just has a couple of children on it. And one of the things that I remember most movingly from the museum was a child's little tricycle. And it was just like the one I had when I was a kid. I am not 75, but they didn't change a lot, did they? So it was one of those little metal tricycles, and the parents who found it buried under the rubble, and people who wouldn't move house because their children had been buried under the rubble there. It happened at a critical time of day. It happened at the time when most people would be just going out of their house in order to go to work. The intention was to cause maximum devastation. They could have done it earlier when people were still in bed. They could have done it later when people were in their offices, but they did it in rush hour when lots of people were out and about, children were on their way to school. And the stories that you read there's just story after story of people looking for their children, looking for their families. It is difficult, though, to look at the city and ever think that anything like that had ever happened. And yet, you think about it, 75 years ago, there's plenty of people in our communities who can remember the war, who can remember being children in the war. It seems like light years ago, but actually it's within the experience of quite a lot of elderly people in Japan. Although it's a few years since I was there, one thing that I remember is that the mayor of Hiroshima, part of his role is to be a champion for peace, and that's an expected thing in the city, that there is a thing about being a person from Hiroshima which means that you stand out for peace and nuclear disarmaments and against anything like that ever happening again. So in a way you can't see it, and yet in a way it is absolutely at the heart of what the city is, even as this modern, vibrant, contemporary city.
The Methodist Church campaigns against nuclear weapons in collaboration with other churches through the Joint Public Issues Team, also known as JPIT. Steve Hucklesbury is the Methodist Policy Advisor with JPIT, who deals with non-proliferation, and he joins me on the line now. Steve, the current position of the Church is, of course, that we're against nuclear weapons. Has it always been like that?
We always have been, although during the height of the Cold War in the 1970s in the UK here, we had the perception that were we to give up our nuclear arms, and Russian missiles would be raining down on our heads. And so actually in the 70s and 80s, our position, while being opposed to the ethics on nuclear weapons, we were a little equivocal at the time. That then changed with the end of the Cold War. And we have entered a time where we have détente and we have not always easy relations, but at least relations with the other great powers that possess nuclear weapons. And in today's world, there should be no excuse for nuclear powers getting rid of these weapons through negotiation with each other, taking steps down the ladder towards nuclear disarmament. Unfortunately, we're not seeing that take place. We've had the rhetoric from President Trump towards Kim that sort of talks up the value of these weapons, even in a war-fighting context. This needs to be reversed. This is very dangerous.
There are some claims that the bombing on Hiroshima and 3 days later on Nagasaki, that they actually saved lives by shortening World War II. And others say that the nuclear deterrent has maintained some degree of global peace now for 75 years. What's the response to those arguments?
Those arguments are put out. In terms of saving lives in the Second World War, it's really difficult to engage with counterfactual arguments in that way. but those arguments are there. For me, the worrying thing is that people are able to construct arguments for nuclear weapons, not just as a deterrent, but construct arguments for them as a possible usable weapon in the context of warfare. That is really worrying. That has always been worrying since the last 75 years since Hiroshima and Nagasaki has been a primary focus of the United Nations. And we need to get beyond a discussion around use of nuclear weapons because that sort of discussion only really adds value to the weapon itself. What churches and many other people across civil society, local governments, NGOs, municipal councils are all engaged with is around a movement towards the abolition of nuclear weapons. Just both abolition, both in their physical presence, but also in the way in which we talk up their use.
Are nuclear weapons something we should still be scared of? Those of us of a certain age remember a time when global nuclear annihilation almost felt imminent, but it seems less of a concern for young people these days.
That's true. I think they have dropped out of the public perception a little bit. I think that's because of other fears. At the moment, we have the fear of coronavirus. Yes, I think that there are two aspects to this. While the weapons exist, we cannot predict the future and what conflict environment might be like in the world. We cannot sit easily and imagine that if there is another major conflict, that nuclear weapons would not be a part of that. For me, that is a very distinct worry. But then there's also just the fact of the enormous cost of maintaining these arsenals. Incredibly, $1 trillion US equivalent will be spent on nuclear weapons over the next 10 years. Something which Pope Francis has described in his very direct manner as theft from the poor. This is an enormous waste of resources which could be much better used in terms of protecting people's health and welfare and being directed towards the common good.
Okay, so we're going to start with a little warm-up, skipping motion, so on the spot, nice and easy. Imagine you've got the rope and you're just bouncing, stay on your toes, try not to let your heels touch the floor, and just nice easy movements, little bend in the knees and just go for it.
Now that maybe isn't the start you would expect to a normal reflective session on issues of faith, but that was Gareth Bennett from the Learning Network of the Methodist Church, who together with colleague John Boyd have been creating YouTube videos for young people that combine fitness with questions about faith. And Gareth is with me on the line now. Gareth, this sounds a marvellous idea. Tell me a little bit more about what you're up to.
In its basic form, we're kind of putting exercise videos out with theological reflections that are hopefully, pertinent to the exercise that allow people just to maybe think a little bit deeper about the exercise that they're doing, their connection with self, a kind of holistic understanding, and just really trying to bring all that together. So it's come out of quite a few years now with Regenerate, with the young people and lots of young people wanting to engage quite heavily, with the sports aspect, and some leaders not seeing the connection between the theology and that activity. So really trying to address the balance that and allow people to have their passions and their fun. That it's okay to engage in those things. And to better ourselves and to try and push and just be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And that comes from a physical aspect as well. There's a huge amount of research out there suggesting the benefits of physical activity on emotional well-being, on social well-being. And and there's no reason that shouldn't translate into spiritual well-being. But, there's not a great deal of research on that, and that's something that we're hoping to try and address with some of the things that we're doing. But yeah, we just really want to kind of push that holistic understanding of how connected everything of us is.
How do you fit faith in with the videos, and what sort of aspects of faith is it that you're exploring?
We're just trying to draw out on the pertinent points. So, with everything with exercise, there's physiological responses. So with the boxercise video that we did, we were looking at breath and just thinking about that kind of transition of breath and God being, and breathing God in, and and looking some of the scriptures of that, and just trying to reflect on the kind of importance and the power of our normal body functions, and how complex and beautiful and creative they are.
Now, we've seen the success of the likes of Joe Wicks with his online workouts. How have your efforts been received?
So from a viewing perspective, really, really positive. I think our first video is up at about 1,200 views. We're regularly getting in the 300-400s for views and for engagements with the posts. Sadly, the reflection engagement is perhaps a little bit less. So people are a little bit less inclined to put their thoughts and responses out there. But we're hoping that'll come with time. This is still a relatively new venture, and something that we're hoping is going to develop as we move forward.
Now, these videos are specifically aimed at young people, aren't they? But let's say maybe they're not so young. Can we have a go as well?
Yep, most definitely. I think the wider the better. We're aiming the Facebook videos particularly at youth groups and young adults, but it is about understanding how all age groups engage in activity and connect their faith with that. Because it doesn't particularly change with the activity or the age. So yes, anybody in any age, we're more than welcome.
And for those who want to take part, where can they find the videos?
On the Facebook page. Every fortnight on a Friday morning, a new exercise videos released with reflections. All of the videos are also on the 3Gen TV YouTube channel under the Sports and Physicality playlist. But we're also hoping to expand that a little bit as well, and do some interviews with people about how they connect their physicality, the sport they do, their activity, the physical world around them with their faith and with their understanding of spirituality. So if there are people that number one want to do an exercise video, displaying their discipline and their passion, they can get in contact with myself or John Boyd. But equally, if they want to be interviewed, they can do exactly the same. And we're just trying to look for that diversity of people's thinking and of people's direction in it.
Okay, so we're going to hold this till the end. This is the last exercise. So really hold it, tense it out. 3, 2, 1, and stop. Well done.
This week's prayer is shared with us by the President of the Methodist Conference, the Reverend Richard Teal.
Gracious God, August is a month for holidays, for being refreshed and rejuvenated, doing things differently, good weather, travel, feeling refreshed and renewed. For many this year, August will be very different. No holiday, little travel, wearing masks. The need to stop, relax and be renewed will be missed for many. We pray out of concern for those people. Bring to them in different ways the rest of mind, body and spirit. So as this month begins, we offer ourselves to you. As we look ahead to the days and weeks of August, may we meet you in the commitments and people of these days, and may we all know that the best of all is God is with us. For we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the Methodist Podcast. Do get in touch if you have stories that you would like us to cover. Until next week, from myself, Mike Ivat, goodbye.